of Girls. I'm the founder of Girls Mean Business, which is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to empowering girls to join professions that are tend to be more masculine heavy, and we just want to be able to equip girls with the skills that they need in order to enter workplaces where you might not see as many other women and you might encounter some gender bias. So today we're going to be talking about gender bias in the workplace, how that shows up, what gender bias just looks like in general in our culture, and what can we do to face gender bias when we see it ourselves. So can I get started? Okay, great, thank you. So first off, what is gender bias? If anyone wants to just like put some answers in the chat or they think, what they feel the definition of gender bias is. If anyone wants to raise their hand or anything. Okay, if not, I have the definition right here. Well, gender bias is defined as a favoritism toward or prejudice against a particular gender. And how does this show up? Well, it shows up a lot more than you think it does. So here's just some examples.
So real quick,
Gender-based.
I
Mhm.
think it's still frozen on like the intro slide. Like,
Oh,
yeah.
oh yeah, I'm so sorry. It says it's paused for some reason. Hmm, I'll just stop sharing.
I can just try making you like the host and see if that helps.
Hmm?
I'm just gonna try making you the host and see if that like helps.
Okay. Yeah, I think it has paused for some reason.
Okay, yeah, it looks like full
Okay.
screen now.
Okay. So now do you see the second
Yeah,
slide?
it looks good now.
Okay, perfect. So just to start over, what is gender bias? So here we have just a formal definition. Gender bias is defined as a favoritism toward or prejudice against a particular gender. And that shows up a lot more than we think in our day-to-day lives. So I just have some examples up here. Gender-based harassment, being asked to help with different tasks based on your gender. So that's some way it could show up in the workforce. Being told you're distracting because of your clothing, seeing more men in leadership positions in workplaces, hiring bias, maternity pay, and very famously, the wage gap. Um, so just to throw another question out to you guys, what is culture? Because culture and bias often have a lot to do with each other. Well, the definition is culture is the set of norms, values, attributes, and behavioral characteristics shared by a particular social group. Gender bias stems from cultural norms that dictate traditional roles and expectations for men and women, influencing everything from career opportunities to household dynamics. And these biases are often perpetuated through media, traditions, and societal institutions. So that's kind of how bias and culture have to do with each other. So we're going to go into a few examples of how gender bias shows up in our culture. Um, so do any of you guys know who these celebrities are? I would say that they're pretty famous. So on the left, we have The Rock and Jason Momoa, who are both embodying very hyper masculine traits. They're often portrayed as strong, rugged, and dominant figures in the media. And they're kind of celebrities who reinforce the idea that masculinity is defined through physical strength and toughness. Well, and then similarly on the right, we have Margot Robbie and Ariana Grande, who all of these celebrities are very talented, but them also represent stereotypical femininity. They're often portrayed as elegant, delicate, and conventionally beautiful, aligning with societal expectations that women should focus on their appearance and exude charm and grace. And while these celebrities are all incredibly talented and successful, their public personas are often shaped to fit traditional gender stereotypes. So then here we have some examples of non-traditional gender roles that show up in celebrities. So Billie Eilish and Kristen Stewart, They both break away from traditional femininity through their style and roles that defy gender norms. Um, like they show that like through media, they show that they kind of blur the line between masculine and feminine aesthetics, showing that gender expression exists on a spectrum and that you don't have to exactly fit hyper masculine or hyper feminine ideals. Um, and that's similar here with Harry Styles and Ryan Gosling. Ryan Gosling, I hope, as everyone knows, played Ken in the movie Barbie, and instead of portraying like the hyper masculine hero that we traditionally see, his character embraces vulnerability, humor, and is a playful critique of traditional gender norms. Harry Styles, as well, is an example of non-stereotypical masculinity. He's known for his gender-fluid fashion choices, such as wearing dresses or feather boas, and he uses his platform to promote individuality and self-expression, and he inspires others to move beyond outdated ideas of what masculinity should look like. So from this, we see that celebrities often show either very stereotypical gender stereotypes or they use their platform to break those gender stereotypes. And they kind of show how in our culture, we kind of value like one way or the other, whereas there's some of these people who are trying to use their platform to break those stereotypes. So then here we can talk about the culture of leadership. These images highlight the lack of diversity in leadership, particularly in government and global decision-making spaces. All of these people are people who have like a lot of control over all of our lives. They're very big on in politics and all that stuff. And as you can see, there's not much diversity. There's really no diversity at all. And of course, there's an overwhelming presence of men with really only one woman being there. And this reflects how power and influence have historically been concentrated in the hands of a very specific demographic, which is very much shaped through gender bias. This lack of representation reinforces traditional gender roles and excludes diverse perspectives that are critical for equitable decision making. Like, I feel as though in order to have the most equitable and um, like laws and policies, there should be a diverse array of people who are making those decisions. Um, so here's a video that I find really interesting. I live in New York City, and I know that I've definitely experienced some gender bias just on the streets through things like catcalling and all those type of stuff. So this is a video of a woman walking around New York City, and it just shows how people perceive women, and I think it's just very powerful. So.
Hey, it's not good. Yeah. So, you're good. Girl, how you doing? Sexy, very eagle. Hello. God bless you. Have a good day. Good. Yeah, yeah. $5,000. Okay, man. Here you go. Nice seeing you.
So I don't know about anybody else, but that video to me is just very shocking. So does anyone have any like responses, reactions? How do you think that she should have reacted in that situation? And really, what is there to say when that happens to you? If anyone wants to put it in the chat or just unmute themselves, feel free. Okay, if not, I could just talk about my reaction. I think it's hard to think about how to respond in those situations because on one hand, like she should stand up for herself, but on the other hand, that could result in violence and turning it into an even bigger deal than it is. So it's very hard to think about. And I think, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more when we do an activity later on, but I think something important to recognize is that when you are experiencing something like sexual harassment and catcalling and things like that, it's very hard to decide how to react. I think that's just a big part of gender bias. Okay. So now we're going to go into the workforce a little more and how gender bias shows up in the workforce. I think one big question to ask ourselves is how do we talk differently about men and women in the workforce? So when we tend to see women who are bosses and leaders, they're categorized as girl bosses, whereas men who are bosses, they're just a boss. Um, and typically, when a woman is in a leadership position, they're deemed as bossy, whereas when a man's in that position, they're just called a leader. And also, I think what comes into this is gender professions. There's certain professions and workforces that tend to be more masculine heavy. So it's a lot, oftentimes, it's harder for a woman to rise up in those industries that are so male dominated. And also, I think it's just people's reactions. Like when you tell them that you're working in an industry that's male dominated, they like kind of have to question it. It's not really innate. Like they just, yeah, it's just a little bit more surprising to people. And that can generate, that shows just a lot of gender bias in that. Um, and then also about working parents, how men and women are seen differently when they are in work, but they have children at home. Society often applies different labels to working mothers and fathers. A working mother is often seen as bossy, cold, or neglectful, while a working father is being praised as a powerful, hardworking, and responsible. And these contrasting perceptions highlight the double standards that reinforce gender stereotypes, particularly around parenting and professional roles. So bias is also quantifiably measurable. I think these statistics really show how present gender bias is in the workplace and how just shocking it is. 42% of women said they had personally experienced gender biased or inappropriate questions during a job interview. So that can often contribute to the fact that women are often not hired for like the highest paying jobs because often they do still face gender bias even in the interview. And 60% of women said that they've experienced unwanted sexual attention or sexist comments in the workplace. And that's over half of women. So it clearly happens a lot. And then also, 1 in 7 women have sought a new job assignment, changed jobs, or quit a job because of sexual harassment and assault. So 1 in 7 women change jobs because of this experience, which I think is just completely shocking. And like we said before, you kind of have to think about whether or not you want to do something about the situation or you just kind of want to deal with it and not make a bigger deal out of what it is. So often when women face sexual harassment and assault in the workforce, they don't do anything about it because complaining about it often, I mean, it could lead to them losing their jobs. So the fact that 1 in 7 women have sought a new job assignment, but 60% of women have experienced unwanted sexual attention or sexist comments in the workforce shows how most women just kind of force themselves to deal with it. Um, so then I think another really shocking statistic is that women who work full time year round earn just about 84 cents for every dollar earned by a white man. And that gap is even bigger for women of color. And I think something really sad is that at the current rate of progress, the gender pay gap will not close until 2088. So we have a long way to go until women are earning as much as men in the workforce. And I think that really shows that we need to take action and do something about it, which I'll definitely talk about later on. But also just how, even though there are these laws and policies that say that women should be paid as much as men when they're doing the same job, it just shows how, even though those laws are in place, they're not always followed because that's shown through the fact that women make 84% of what men make. Um, so I was just wondering if anybody had any stories of any gender bias that they'd experienced. I know it's kind of a hard topic, so if nobody has anything, I could share some of my stories, but um, gender bias you've encountered in the workplace or even at school. I know that as a high school student, I haven't really been in the workforce much, but I've definitely seen things going on at school. Um, so if anybody has.
Yeah, I can share like experience, I guess. Like obviously I'm still on the younger side, so I'm sure it's a little different. But during my first job, I worked as a martial arts instructor at a dojo. So obviously that's a male dominated field, as like in fact in the dojo that I worked at, there were no like female head instructors. So I was an assistant instructor, but sometimes I would notice that like certain combos or drills would get deferred and like my male coworkers would help teach the drill, even though technically like I was a higher rank or like more qualified. But even then it was like that wasn't really like the annoying part, but rather it was kind of unfortunate to see how that would translate to the students because then some of like the girls in the class would think, oh, like maybe I'm not cut out for that or I'm never going to be as good as like the other boy in the class, which is not true at all, right? So I think it's not only about giving women like the respect they deserve in the workplace, but also making sure that you're inspiring like the next generation of young girls and women to kind of continue in that field as well. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think you bring up a really great point about the younger generation because gender bias, it's not innate, we're not born with it, but it is very easily passed on. And I think often we don't see how it is passed on. Like, I think a great example is like children's toys. Like, girls are often given like baby dolls. Like, I know that I had a bunch of baby dolls when I was younger, and my brother, on the other hand, was given trucks because it's just kind of like trying to instill in girls that their role is to be a mother, whereas with guys, they're supposed to be strong and construction workers and stuff like that. So I think it's a very great point. It starts at a very early age, and I think it's up to us. In order to not pass on gender bias to the next generation, we have to be the ones to not pass it down.
Yeah, I think we have one in the chat. Yeah, if you want to read that out loud.
Yeah. So mostly just inappropriate comments from male peers, seeing as I'm the only female student, or just automatically feeling less than in those male classrooms. Yes, I can completely relate to that. Um, I think I also see it a lot in STEM-based class specifically. Um, I know I mentioned before that like certain areas are more male dominated than others. And I think stereotypically STEM, like math and science, are definitely more male dominated. So I totally feel that, like in my calculus class, there's definitely way less girls than guys. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, and I guess also the inappropriate comments part totally shows up a lot, and we really need to work on how to respond to it because it's so hard to respond to sometimes. So speaking of being able to respond to those things, I have a little activity for us to do. I am going to, sorry. So I have a couple handouts for us. So this is an activity on how do we respond to bias, especially in the workforce? Like, what can we do to face it? So I kind of categorize responses into two categories. You can either be calling out or calling in. So calling in is a response that you kind of like want to know more about what's going on in the situation. Like, for example, the first one is, what was your intention when you said that? You really like, this is really trying to face the action as it comes, right? Whereas calling out is a little bit more like, if you want to respond but you do not want to make like as big of a deal about it, I guess. Like, I think calling out phrases are a good way to show that something is offensive but not like really dissect it as much, if that makes sense. So does anybody want to volunteer to do an activity? Or I could do it with somebody, I think, or we can even do it through the chat. If somebody wants to pick a line from one of these, I just come up with some things that women often hear in the workforce, and then we can practice how to respond. Or people can even, if anyone remembers any gender bias specifically that they've heard that they want to use as an example, that'd also be great. So, does anybody want to participate? We could also do it through the chat. Um, anything like that. Not, we could also just go through the different ways of calling in and calling out. Well, first of all, let's look at these. These are lines that women often hear in the workforce, unfortunately. The first one, don't you feel like you're abandoning your kids by being at work? That goes back to our different expectations of working women and working men.
Real quick,
Women who are in
Ella,
the,
if I don't know if you're sharing a different screen, but I think everyone just sees like the confronting
oh
bias
no,
activity slide. Yeah.
oh yeah, I am sorry. I'm so sorry.
Here, you're good, you're good.
Um, um,
I think if you want, you can, yeah, maybe just like reshare it. Yeah.
mm, yeah, okay. Can we see this now?
Yep.
Great, thank you for letting me. Um, so yeah, so here are just some phrases that I found that women have said that they've heard in the workforce. The first two about kids and our different expectations of working men and working women. People might come up to you and ask you, like, why aren't you with your kids? I think that's very direct, and someone would have to be very bold to come up to you and directly say that, but it does happen. And even if people don't say it out loud, you might be treated differently because you are a working mother. People might think that you are more tired or more emotional, or just think that you're not as dedicated to your job because you have other obligations, but it often doesn't, the expectation often isn't as much on men as it is women. Like, no one would, probably nobody would say that to a working father. They would just commend them on being able to balance being a father and working. Um, you should smile more, I think, is just a classic. I know I've heard that one a lot. And I think it just goes into the fact that women are often judged based on their appearance, and just the expectation that they should always be happy and like doing things in order to please men. So I think that's definitely one that shows up a lot. She's probably on her period, just calling girls emotional, thinking that they don't have as good of a emotional stability, which can often lead to like not getting assigned for jobs or not being put into leadership positions because you're just seeing it as more emotional. Um, like the ones where it's saying, can you point me to the person in charge? Are you the assistant? Just because stereotypically women are not seen in a leadership position. So when they are, people can be a little confused when a woman shows that they're in power. Like they might assume that their male colleague is their boss when they're not. Um, and just, yeah, I think the other ones kind of go into that a little bit more. But yeah, those are just phrases that can definitely come up in the workforce, unfortunately. And then, so can you guys see this second one? Okay, so yeah, so these were just some of the responses that I'd come up with. There's definitely a lot of different ways to respond to bias in the workplace. But I think the best way to go is just always to say something. Saying something is better than saying nothing at all. And there's a way that you can do it without risking your position or risking like your status in a workforce. And that's why it's important to pick between calling out and calling in phrases. Um, like, yeah, so I just think that I can send this out also when we're done so people can just have it on them. But yeah, there's so many different ways to respond, and I think just picking which one works best under um, certain situations. Yeah, I think yeah, doing a mix of some could also work too. Yeah, there's just so many ways that you can respond. Yeah, calling in and then calling out also for sure. Um, right. Okay. Now let's go here. Just one second. Um, so yeah, so that's just a little activity on different ways you can respond. I'll send those out if you guys want to look at them. Oh yeah, can you clarify more on calling in and calling out? For sure. Let me just go back to, okay, yeah. So they're definitely similar in some ways, but at least to me, like calling in is more asking somebody like why they said that thing. Like asking them, what was your intention? Or why is this the best way to proceed? What else could you have said to me? What sort of impact do you think that your actions might have? It's more, I think to me, calling in is making the person who said the thing question them. Oh, I'm sorry, you guys can't see this. Share one more time. But like I said, to me, calling in is just making that person reflect on what they've said because reflection is the first step to progress. So if someone is often portraying gender bias towards you, I think calling in is a good way to be like, hey, like, this is like, I think your actions have effects on people. Like, you should really understand why that's so. And I think calling out is a little similar. I think it's less questioning. Um, I think it's more just assertive, being like, hey, like this was offensive to me. Like, it's kind of you explaining why something was offensive rather than asking them, why do you think that this was offensive? I hope that answers your question. Um, yeah, thank you. Um, right. Okay. Is there any more questions about this? Um, no, we can go. So we can go back to our presentation now. So I know that it's a little mixed up here. Sorry about that. So policy and law about gender bias. So how do we see that showing up? So there's the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. So you shouldn't be discriminated under this law. You shouldn't be discriminated against because you're a woman or because you are a man or just based on your gender at all. But of course, as we know, this still happens. So this is kind of an example of how even though there is a law prohibiting something, it doesn't mean that it always comes into fruition. And then there's also the Equal Pay Act of 1963, which requires employers to pay men and women equally for performing substantially the same work. So again, as we know, women earn 84 cents to a man's dollar. So even though this law, this act is in place, doesn't mean that women are paid as much as men. Women are still often in lower paying positions than men are. So yeah, it still definitely shows up. And then the Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978, which prohibits sex discrimination on the basis of pregnancy. I'm not sure. I think it actually meant prohibits employment discrimination on the basis of pregnancy. But yeah, I think just that's a big thing also. Often, I mean, before this act and after it, if someone knows that you're planning, and if an employer knows that you're planning on getting pregnant, then you often won't get the job, or just there'll be some bias there because they feel as though having kids will affect your work, and also like they think that you're just gonna quit if you have a child. So this act says that you're not really supposed to do that, but it often does still happen. So policies and laws about gender bias are great and they show that we're making steps, but they don't exactly always solve the entire problem, which I'll talk about here. So culture change, laws and stuff like that are so important to happen, but in order to really make the progress that we want to happen, there needs to be a change in culture. And that happens when like it's just not just the laws, it's about the way that we think. And like I talked before about kids, how do we pass down gender bias in order to avoid gender bias in the workforce and just in general? It's important to not pass it down to our children, which I think is a big thing. And like I said here, it's easier to change laws than it is to change cultures, ingrained beliefs, values, and norms. And I think the biggest thing here is that the more we call out these things and talk about them, the more the culture changes. So doing stuff like this, talking about how gender bias shows up, doing our calling in and calling out exercise, we can, if we recognize that it's there, people will often realize that it's happening because there's so much gender bias that shows up in our lives that people don't even realize is gender bias. So if we realize it in somebody else, then calling it out is really important to make a change. So that's all I have for you guys today. Does anybody have any questions at all or just want me to go back to any of the slides? You can put them in the chat or unmute yourselves. Um, Great. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. I'll try to send out the responses for anybody who wants to view them. And yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bella, for that presentation. If anyone does have any questions that maybe they don't have right now, but want to, ask later, you guys can always either reach out to STF and we can get you in contact with Bella, or Bella, if you want to maybe drop like your email or your website, like
Yes.
into the chat, you can go ahead and do that. And then this meeting was also recorded. So it will be on our website as well as our YouTube channel if you ever want to go back and rewatch it or show it to someone else.
Yeah, thank you. Here's my email, and here's my website if you want to go check that out. Yeah. Thank you guys so much.
Yep, and then just as a reminder, we will be having our last HERizon Fest event next week. So if you guys are still interested in topics like this, or you want to get like internships or opportunities to work towards issues, you can always join that session and you can get a lot of cool, I guess, opportunities at that event next week. So make sure to, keep contact with our social media and Instagram so you can keep up on dates and timings for those. But thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Bella, and have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Stop the recording.